Welcome to Conversations with Women Who Lead, honest conversations about business, leadership, and what really shapes how women lead. I'm Anne-Marie McHenry, business coach, consultant, creator, and a therapist for the past 2 decades. On this podcast, I sit down with women to talk about their businesses and their unique areas of expertise, as well as how their upbringing, background, and the social conditioning they've experienced have shaped the way they lead. We explore what they've had to learn and unlearn along the way. I'll also be sharing my own journey of founding and selling a business and the very real trials, lessons, and reinvention involved in building my next chapter, Rose and Stone. This is a space for thoughtful leadership, honest conversation, and women redefining success on their own terms. I'm so happy you're here. Thanks for joining us on Conversations with Women Who Lead. Dr. Bluma Sapir is a clinical psychologist with over 20 years of experience in individual and pair therapy, working with couples, adult siblings, parent-adult-child relationships, close friends, and workplace pairs, and most recently training as a life coach. Her work addresses both common and complex relational challenges, including chronic conflict, betrayal, trauma, sexual concerns, fertility journeys, and life stage transitions. A central focus of her work is adult sibling relationships, co-authoring I'm Right, You're Stupid, to examine how unresolved sibling dynamics shape attachment and conflict across the lifespan. Her approach is a life coach through her pair coaching model, helping individuals and pairs translate insight into durable relational change. She's the mother of 5, bringing lived insight to her clinical and coaching work. Welcome, Dr. Bluma Sapir. Thank you so much for joining me on Conversations with Women Who Lead. I would love to hear about what you do and your experience to start.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne-Marie, for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. So when I think about what led me or drew me to my work, I think about that phrase that people say, me search research. If you've ever heard that before, right? It's not like it was a professional decision at first. I think that it was something that I lived with a long time before I ever really had language for it. So I grew up in a pretty chaotic, complicated, confusing environment. And I found myself assigned to a role that I think many people would be familiar with, but wouldn't necessarily name or know how to name. But I look at it as being the emotional bridge in my family. So I served that role between my parents when they fought and eventually divorced. And I served that role for my mother in dealing with my other siblings. So I think that I was doing a lot of paying attention, a lot of mediating, a lot of interpreting feelings, a lot of trying to help people find repairs. And I think that what I, noticed or sensed were that these dynamics were bigger or felt bigger than just one person. So at the time, I didn't really feel like this was work. It just felt very necessary for me, and I think that over time, I've learned to be very deeply attuned to what happens between people, not only within one person. And so I think that was the thread that followed me into my professional life and led me to become a psychologist.
And so tell me more about your work as a psychologist.
Sure. So I have spent most of my career working with individuals and couples. What I've continued to notice is that so much of our suffering and our healing happens in the space between two people. That can happen between an individual adult and a mental health professional in their own individual healing. And when it comes to relationships between couples. So I think that I found that the more that I worked with couples, the more that I saw that the healing didn't happen in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't happen within only one person's nervous system, but rather the interaction between those two nervous systems, whether it was the misattunements or the longings or, the attempts to repair. Um, so over time, I started to think about this more broadly. And so, yes, couples, but also parent adult child pairs and siblings and, best friends and professional partnerships. And I started to uh, kind of look at this as pair work, right? That
Mm-hmm.
these duo relationships that shape us, that challenge us, that often stay with us across a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So I now my work really is trying to help people who want to look at themselves individually, and also look at their relationships to try to find where they can use this history to build strengths and build cooperation and really build a broader sense of what it means to be a pair in a relationship in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
I love that you're
yeah.
calling those relationships pairs because, you started to specialize in working with couples and then realized that there's more to relationships than just people who are partnered in a couple. There's parent child, there's siblings, there's friendships, there's all kinds of pairs that
Yeah.
we are just in relationship with another person, and that's two people are involved. So I love that you're calling it pairs.
Thanks.
It sounds like your interest in getting into working with relationships started with your younger years, your childhood, growing up in a large family, watching the dynamics between your parents, and probably a lot of other people because you had siblings and more people involved in your life, I'm sure. Can you tell me about how you became Dr. Bluma Sapir and the research that you did as you got your doctorate?
Sure. Right. So I remember actually the day that I decided I wanted to be a psychologist.
Okay.
I was in eighth grade and I had gone to my own psychologist and I had one meeting and poured my heart out. And then she invited my mother to come in for a private conversation. And when they came out, they started talking about all the things that I had just shared.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so jarring. And I remember thinking, I'm going to grow up and become a psychologist and keep everybody's secrets. And that was the impetus to starting. In graduate school, I felt like I finally found a home for the way that my brain thinks.
Mm.
Um, when I heard learning about different disorders wasn't, I found so much compassion for people and a clarity. I felt like a lot of my life I was so confused by behaviors because I didn't really understand how to think about them. And then
Mm-hmm.
this gave me this framework to really start to. And growing up on the border of El Paso, El Paso, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and Mexico, I was always in what I would consider a multicultural community. In fact, for very long, I felt like I was Mexican, even though I'm not from Mexico. But like, the culture. I mean, when I make food, my comfort food is always enchiladas, beans, and rice. It's like, it's a very culture is a big part of my understanding about how human beings operate. And I in fact, looking at when I started doing couples work and studying it in school and it was at the very beginning and I focused on it for um, until I mean, forever. That's really been my focus is couples and culture. And those two things go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, and then ultimately when I was, I think that spirituality and, religion,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes gets a bit of a bad rap in the
Mm-hmm.
psychology kind of mental health
Mm-hmm.
field. Um, you might even consider it the softest science of them all. But I think that it is a huge part of how we um, relate to the world. And so I also felt like there's a lot of healing that can be found in those kind of wisdom traditions. And so I ended up writing my dissertation. It was a comprehensive literature review, looking at the spiritual practice within the Jewish culture, and
Mm.
I really rounded out my understanding of how I think human beings find themselves in conflict and despair, and the way in which we can find ourselves toward healing and recovery, if you will.
Mm-hmm. That's so fascinating to do that research on spirituality and culture, because spirituality and culture involves people and what they're creating together, right? And their belief systems.
Exactly.
Can I ask what you found?
Exactly.
Is there an easy
Yeah.
way to describe that?
Yes, absolutely. So firstly, the research is very, very rich within Buddhism or Eastern religions, other Eastern religions, um, and Christian. There's actually a whole field of Christian counseling.
Mm-hmm.
If you go on Psychology Today, you can click that as an
Mm-hmm.
option.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's, a lot of appreciation for that. And at the time I was in an internship when I was in my third year of grad school, working with the Native American population.
Mm-hmm.
And I also found that they had so many spiritual traditions that, aided in the healing and growth of a person's mind, body, and spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I also was like, okay, well, what is my, as a Jewish woman, what does my culture have to say about this? And one of the one of the practices that exists is called the counting of the Omer,
Mm-hmm.
and it is a 49-day, 7-week practice that goes through 7 different human emotional attributes and looks at how they show up in our lives in a healthy or unhealthy balance, always trying to find the balance.
Mm-hmm.
And you go through each of those 7 and how they themselves interact with each other. And the goal is that you go through you know, a stock of how you're holding up right now in those different emotional ways, and for yourself in relation to others. And the goal is to try to come to the other side of that, feeling both a sense of peace in
Mm-hmm.
where you've been, and also with a plan and an understanding of where you need to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I focused on in my dissertation.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. That's so
Yeah, it
cool.
was really thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. Tell me about how your experience and education now informs your current business and the work that you do.
So the part of what I feel like has taken root in me and actually has changed me in some ways is holding a space to allow another person's perspective to wash over you,
Mm,
and all the while still holding your own perspective with dignity. And
mhm,
that is a very um, you know uh, strategic thing to have to learn how to do.
mhm,
It does not necessarily come naturally. Um, I think that one of those things can come naturally to a person, right? So we can be very clear about how we feel and have no problem saying it, or we can be very good at listening to other people and not knowing how to express ourselves. I think that those two things are, those polarized places can feel very natural to some people depending
mhm,
on their personality type or their sensory profile. But the being able to do both
mhm,
was a skill that took time to really develop.
mhm,
And the purpose in my professional life with using that ability is to be able to allow a person enough space to find the answers themselves before we see things. It's much easier for us to see what's going
Mm-hmm.
on, but
Mm-hmm.
the growth often, not always, but often the growth is helping a person believe in themselves that they have the answers
Mm-hmm.
inside, and helping them draw those answers to the surface vis-a-vis reflecting back their own stories, or asking, clarifying, or questions, to like further refine their understanding of what they are saying and feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's been something that helps me professionally,
Mm-hmm.
and as well as personally.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a tool.
Mm-hmm. And as you think about,
Does that answer? Yeah.
yeah, let me go a little bit deeper. As you think about working with pairs, and let's say maybe one person, it comes very naturally to listen to the other person's perspective, let their perspective wash over them. And the other person in the pair, it's very natural for them to share their perspective and be very rooted in their perspective. How do you help the pair kind of like come to the same understanding or take each other's perspectives in a more balanced way? Because it seems like it would be easy if you have two people who pair up, one person's really good at listening to the other and the other person's really good at talking, then we're in a relationship where one person's needs tend to be met probably more often than the other. And so what I hear you describing is that's a skill to develop, is sharing your needs, but also being able to take on another perspective. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I have a perfect example, kind of a anecdotal story to describe this. I was working with a couple where one of the part, the you know one of the one partner worked in mental health. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so he was very good at expressing and holding space on a
Mm-hmm.
level. Okay, I mean they had conflict in their relationship. That's why they were in
Sure.
therapy, but on his own was able to do that. And the wife came from a culture that did not value uh, complaining. Okay, did not
Mm-hmm.
value celebrating anything that was too emotional or too, there was a very, very limited range
Mm-hmm.
where you could express yourself. And yet she wasn't living in that culture, and she was married to somebody who had a very common, a very easy way of doing it. And so as they were going through a conflict, she shares what her problem is, what she's, where she's struggling, and he wants to explain to her what really happened. And
Mm-hmm.
so I help him to learn to pause and first reflect back to her what
Mm-hmm.
she's seeing. And I did the same for her, and it was very difficult for her to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It was really difficult for both of them, but
Mm-hmm.
much more difficult for somebody who does not have the skills just
Mm-hmm.
to express themselves. And what I explain is, and it's so helpful to understand that there's science behind this. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
emotion.
Yeah.
And emotion you could say is science too, but the science is like physical heart rate,
Mm-hmm.
fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
That when we create the pattern that as the Gottman Institute beautifully defines, understanding must precede advice. And I
Mm-hmm.
use that in this way as well, that if we put ourselves in a position to first share and reflect back what we're hearing, their perspective is, um, it slows us down. It
Mm-hmm.
forces us to slow down. That means our heart rate stays hopefully under 100 beats per minute. Our fight or flight is not kicked off. We're still in
Mm-hmm.
a place where we can be creative and constructive. And so, in doing this, very often I'll say, "Okay, now this is okay. So you understand why this is important. All right, go ahead, give it a go." And then they launch into a, "I heard what you said, but," and I
Mm-hmm.
and so my role really is very active. I really just I try to always remind them that I come from love. I say that, like, my
Mm-hmm.
heart is fully present here for you,
Mm-hmm.
and to help you, I need you to try something that's different than what you're used to. And it's uncomfortable and it's clunky and it feels like it doesn't feel natural or even real because I'm the one saying to do it, and that feel, but your brain will
Mm-hmm.
not interpret it that way. Your brain will take in this information
Mm-hmm.
as if it is natural and it is you. So that if you do it one full time, then the next time you come to a situation like this, your brain will suddenly say, I have two choices here. And it bifurcates. I can either go this way, which is a very heavy corded off area that
Mm-hmm.
I've done very often. And I already know the outcome doesn't work for me, or I can try this very nascent approach, but it's there. The second you feel like you have choice, all of a sudden it's a brand new game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I try to approach it in working with pairs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you find that the skill of being able to listen, hold space, reflect back the other person's experience, very important and often difficult for most of us, and that not being able to do that well often creates conflict in our relationships, right? Do you find that
Yeah.
type of conflict and that, skill that needs to be developed, does that translate to other pairs? Because I know a lot of this research comes from couples and how we support couples in this work of understanding each other and really aligning with each other. How do you see that? And does it translate to the parent-child dynamic or to the sibling relationships or to friends?
Oh my gosh. The truth is, as I said, these pairs are really duo relationships. It's
Mm-hmm.
with two people. We see this most often in couples therapy because that is what the market has supported for the last 40 years in terms of
Mm-hmm.
who goes to therapy. The second pair that is less common, but I see in my practice, less common in the market, but very much a part of my practice, is parent adult child pairs.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not the same process because you're dealing with a different kind of history between two people where the
Mm-hmm.
parent was the adult and the child was the child, and now it's an adult child, and so they're trying to navigate how to adjust expectations given unresolved history that
Mm-hmm.
still feels very present and gets activated pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to hold a perspective, typically the challenge becomes teaching the adult child to learn how to honor that their parent um, is a person also,
Mm-hmm.
not not just the parent that is
Yeah.
now, you has to listen to me. There's a demand from the child to be heard, which is very common in parent adult
Mm-hmm.
child pairs. And the parent doesn't want to hear and doesn't really want to take in that they, how many things are they going to listen to that they were wrong? They did the best you can't possibly understand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the key feature that I try to teach it into with these pairs is that when you go back into the memory work, which is
Mm-hmm.
a big part of typically the conflict, is because a child will remember something a certain way, and
Mm-hmm.
the parent very, very often has a different recollection of the same event. And the
Mm-hmm.
parent feels like they know better because they were an adult when all of this was happening, and the child can't possibly understand all the other things. And no, that's not what happened. But actually, the research, Dr. Ronald Rohner, he's done some amazing work in this field.
Mm-hmm.
And, his research, over like, I think 63 countries, he studied parent adult child relationships. It's
Wow.
amazing. And he found rather that very, very often, if not almost always, the parent does not corroborate the
Mm-hmm.
child's version of events, and it doesn't make it any less valid. So
Mm-hmm.
if you get stuck trying to process what was true, you will forever be in conflict because the child lived with that truth that has
Mm-hmm.
defined their development. So is it really about the event itself, or is it about how that landed for them? And so that teaching that understanding and really kind of normalizing for the parent that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, makes sense. You're not going to remember this at all that way.
Yeah.
Nope, it's going to be different, and that's okay. It
Yeah.
doesn't make you wrong. It doesn't make you wrong. In fact, it makes both of you right. But you have to hear each other's perspectives in order to understand, where are we going from here? You
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
So that's in that population, that's what I would say about parent, adult, child pairs. I would just also cross over into sibling relationships and say very similar pattern
Mm-hmm.
goes on there, where you have two different people who had, two different experiences. I heard an interview, I think it was definitely Gabor Mate, who was saying that, someone said, oh, my sibling and I grew up in the same household, and he interrupted and said, no, no one grows up in the same household. And it's so true
Yep.
that, each of us has a different, we are born with a different way that we sense the world and interact with our environment, and different birth orders, and then where the parent is and how that is landing for them, and how they're able to regulate their emotions around each child. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's
Mm-hmm.
harder. And so, that affects how the sibling relationship develops as well. So learning how to kind of see the different perspectives on some of the same experiences that they
Mm-hmm.
shared, firsthand, is also one of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would then finish off by saying that best friends, as well as are like siblings, I would say, in a way. And those professional relationships, those workplace pairs, um, it's so important to be able to learn how to what I like to call an acknowledge, not
Yes.
an apology. Okay. You don't have to take ownership for someone else's feelings,
Mm-hmm.
but much like what Esther Perel says, that impact does not erase intention does not erase impact.
Mm-hmm.
So very often in therapy, I hear people say, "Look, I didn't intend for that to happen,"
Mm-hmm.
and so somehow that feels it helps resolve in them this feeling that they're not a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
Great. No, we agree. You're not a bad person. And that happened, and that impacted that person in a certain way. And so if you can acknowledge, like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, that happened to you. I hear that that was hard for you. I'm sorry that my actions led
Mm-hmm.
to you having pain. Just an
Mm-hmm.
acknowledgement of that, I think, goes a long way. And it has to be that you're able to hold a little bit of space for
Mm-hmm.
somebody else's different perspective long enough for that relationship to calibrate too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was a long answer.
So much awesome information in that answer. I love the acknowledge. I've never heard that before. And it's that feels so profound and impactful to me, because the acknowledgement is just so important, but it does require being able to hold the space yourself and not react or need to prove or make sure that somebody else knows your perspective, but just acknowledging without apologizing for how they feel, because it's not your responsibility. Like, how somebody feels is not your responsibility, but you can have an impact on somebody that is very worthy of acknowledging. So I
Yeah.
love that acknowledge. That's so good.
Yeah. Yeah. Use it.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear, I'd love for some time in my life to come around and hear it, someone else use it and be like, yes.
we'll make sure that happens. Yes.
Yeah.
But the part about the parent-child dynamic and parent and child remembering things differently feels so important. And yes, the adult is going to have more perspective because they've lived more life than their child. But I love that you mentioned what the child remembers is what has shaped part of their development. And so understanding that perspective and acknowledging that is also very profound and very impactful for the parent to hear. And then also the siblings who grew up in quote unquote the same household did not have the same experience. They were however many months or years apart. When they were born, their parents were in a different emotional situation, perhaps economical, professional, just the way that their parents received them. They were inevitably in a different
Right.
in their lives when each sibling was born. And so even if the siblings experienced the same dinner table conversation together with their parents, their relationship with their parents was different, because when they were born, their parents were in a different place, and they're also perceiving things differently based on all those different factors of when they were born and beginning to be raised. There's just so much complexity, but also it's so simple at the same time, the way that you broke it down, like to how differently we receive and experience different situations just based on who we are.
Totally. I really feel like there is such an opportunity right now, especially with so much of this current, I don't know, like a soup du jour, like this thing that's out there right now that's like of no contact and very toxic relationships. And I have so much appreciation for the experience of being in a relationship that's toxic. I personally can relate to that, and professionally have seen it so many times. It is real. I don't want to minimize that,
Mm-hmm.
but I also want to encourage people to um, understand that no matter where you go, there you are, right?
Yeah.
And so if you think that you can walk away from a toxic relationship, that means that on some level, that person that you're trying to escape from got so deeply embedded in you that the only
Mm-hmm.
choice you have is to walk away. But what are you going to do with all that energy, all that
Mm-hmm.
tension, the impact that had
Mm-hmm.
on you? What do you do with that? And human beings tend to, you can just look at children who watch how many Frozen movies parents have complained about, or, Toy Story or whatever, kids like to repeat, 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 repeat. That's how they learn. And so
Mm-hmm.
we oftentimes as humans want to get, have, a sense of control over, and mastery over things that were confusing or uncomfortable or scary. And so we seek familiar, whether it's good
Mm-hmm.
for us or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think at minimum, if the choice is no contact, my choice in that moment for that person would be, and then you should go right into therapy or coaching, even to try to find a way of understanding what is true for you, what
Mm-hmm.
and what you want to do with that information.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult if you have never gone to therapy before to
Mm-hmm.
jump into the next step of taking
Mm-hmm.
action on that. So, just going into a deep dive, whether it's therapy or,
Mm-hmm.
eat, pray, love kind of vibe, something that gives you, a time to really like take in what is true for you and trying to find
Mm-hmm.
a way of integrating who you are and separating the parts that don't feel authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't, then you play that role somehow in other relationships.
Oh, that's so true. Yes. And back to your point of the relationship that might be toxic that we decided to step away from, even if that person is no longer in our life or we don't have contact with them, that experience of being with them, that pain and those patterns are still living in us. And we like to revisit and be reminded and kind of keep talking about what we know, like that that repetition that you were mentioning. That's so true. And so then we create the story completely based on our experience of what happened, and we
Right.
tell ourselves that story on repeat. And I love your prompt to say, go to therapy. Like, let's talk about that, because we need to find a different perspective. Otherwise, that really negative, detrimental story stays in our heart, and it's still painful. And in some ways, we're still in relationship with that person, even though we've cut off
That's
contact.
exactly right. Exactly, Anne Marie. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And so then, you're really stuck in a loop.
Mm-hmm.
And also you're stuck seeing yourself in that role, whatever role that
Yes.
is. And there's I don't know, I want to say it this way, but I don't want it to come across in any way that would be unkind, but it's very victimy.
Mm.
You feel like you're the victim of that story. And so then you feel empowered
Mm-hmm.
by walking away,
Mm-hmm.
but you really are only addressing the immediate issue, which is I can't
Mm-hmm.
take it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then you haven't. I mean, there are simple things like, simple in the sense of simple to understand, um, like the grief. the
Mm-hmm.
grief that comes from walking away from that relationship, and the grief of not having the kind of relationship that you would want,
Mm-hmm.
or not have, feeling completely unseen or uncared for or neglected by somebody, and how you are able to, you know, um, metabolize that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're trying to get rid of toxicity and trying to find a way of healing, I, I mean, there are very few ways of doing that without addressing it.
Yeah.
I often say the only way is through.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, find alternative. I mean, alternative as in avoiding looking at it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I think the
Mm-hmm.
only way is through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you speak to, there is a lot of cutoff. I almost want to call it the cutoff culture. It's very
Mhm.
prevalent right now. I think in large part because of people going to therapy and starting that process of, is this a healthy relationship for me? If it's not, I'm going to set the boundary of no longer choosing that relationship or staying involved. But it happens a lot nowadays. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that, especially as you talk about needing to process it. But there is a lot of cutoff happening, and especially between family members.
Yeah. Um, so one of the ways I understand it, I think, is because there's a little bit of a cultural um, permissiveness to um, walking away from things you don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you have that piece over here. That would be what I would consider the child. Okay. I would say that the research is like, I think it's something like 23% of the people who seek parent adult child, pair
Mm-hmm.
relation treatment are children, but the rest are parents. Okay, so the
Mm-hmm.
parents are really struggling because
Mm-hmm.
the kids are walking away, and they
Yes.
can't control that. They can't,
Yeah.
they don't know what to do with that, because, and so part
Mm-hmm.
of that, and I think that part of the problem for parents is that they feel entitled to respect.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, unfortunately, respect is not given, it is earned. And
Mm-hmm.
that is really hard for parents to um, accept. My caveat here is that it feels like, and I'll say my personal opinion, I should
Mm-hmm.
say, my personal opinion is that parents, I think, do have, I don't use the word deserve very often, okay? But in this
Mm-hmm.
case, I'll say that
Mm-hmm.
a parent who raised you deserves the very basic level of respect for having done so.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that puts a lot of parents who neglected their children, this, that, and the other, into that separate category. People who do a disservice to their child,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that for
Yeah.
them. But a parent who raised you and gave, roof over your head and clothes and food and, helped you through school and blah, blah, blah. This, like the standards, I would
Mm-hmm.
say, um, I think are entitled to a baseline respect. Okay. That's my opinion, and not everybody would agree with it, but I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's what parents expect. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, when they're not getting that from their child, I think they double down. Most parents
Mm-hmm.
kind of double down.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's a mistake, just like it is for a child who's having a tantrum. You have to understand that there are certain things that we can't control.
Yeah.
So I think that the culture, and again, this no contact is not only between parent and child, but it
Mm-hmm.
is predominantly the case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, the parent has to understand that their child is an adult, and they have to grow up the way that they think about their child.
Mm-hmm.
And their child, I think, is probably has been in a pattern of really wanting their relationship to be more than it is, and
Mm-hmm.
wishing their parent could show up for them in a way that makes them feel seen or understood or supported at minimum, and their goals and expectations are very askew. And so there's only so long that a trajectory that's going like this can continue before it's going to crash or go in opposite directions. And I think that I would imagine that they were going like this, they crossed over, and then the no contact is going this way. And unless something happens that's drastically going to reroute that situation, it will continue, I think, to go like this and then this because of family events, and then this, in a crisscross pattern, because people do end up going back to their families for some things.
Yeah.
And then they have to see their, toxic family member. And then, and then everything resurfaces and it starts again. And so, like I said, there's no growth to walk away. Well, let me say it with a caveat that if you endured and endured and endured and never walked away, there is an empowering nature to saying no more. But saying no more is the beginning of a process, not the end. So,
yeah, it's all very stressful to go through that, like coming together out of conflict and then separating out of conflict and then coming back together and revisiting the conflict and then having to separate again. Like that pattern is just so stressful to me and sounds so painful, but it's not uncommon. It happens in all kinds of relationships all the time.
True.
Yeah.
That's
I think
true. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to say that there's also one other piece to this, which is important to mention, which is very often when the child, when that small percentage of adult children reach out for help, usually it's because they're either pregnant, they're expecting a child, or they want to start trying to have children, and all of a sudden they're like looking at things from a very different perspective, and wanting, whether it's, I don't want to repeat the patterns that I had from my own parent, but I don't trust myself, on how to do that, or I want my child to have a relationship with my parent, but I currently don't, so I won't. I don't know how to do that, or I don't trust my parents on how they're going to have, because the grandparent piece is a humongous factor in this no contact situation, because all of a sudden the parent feels an entitlement to have a relationship with their grandchild. And this becomes a very common, very, like, I would say, similar to, when parents get divorced, right? And when a couple gets divorced, and that, and it's like, well, both parents actually do have a right to be with their child, but how you express that right can really shape the way that you have a relationship with your child. And the same is true in these grandparent-grandchild things. If the grandparent is not, an unhealthy, abusive person, in a way that would threaten the safety of the grandchild. Okay. But they're just really super annoying and frustrating, let's just say, okay, to the child. Then on some level, the child might be very surprised at what kind of relationship that the grandchild could have with their grandparent. It actually might be a restorative emotional experience for everybody, but it's very hard when the child and when the parent and adult child don't have a way of relating to really trust that that's going to trickle down in a positive way. But that is another reason why people come to therapy about this, is to deal with, what am I going to do to create, some kind of symmetry here,
Yeah.
So,
And I would imagine there's also a lot of grief that the adult child experiences of not having their parent involved in the grandchild or the child's life. Like not having your mom or dad around when you have a kid because you've chosen that cutoff is really sad.
Absolutely. And what's equally sad is when they don't cut it off, and then you have regular explosive
Yeah.
upheavals or silent treatment for like
Mm,
weeks, and people are
mhm,
carrying all this tension. Both are equally troublesome,
mhm,
and troubling,
mhm, mhm,
so and I think there's also like, you know the child feeling the need to punish their parent as
mhm,
well, and manipulating their situation, knowing that their parent wants to have contact with their children,
mhm.
and using it as a manipulation to somehow get their need met. And so
Yeah.
part of what therapy does is help them talk about
Mhm,
what where is that need coming from? Like what origin story do you
mhm,
have in your relationship that is unresolved still?
mhm,
Let's help resolve that, because typically once you find the origin story of where something came from in a relation, and especially in parent adult child pairs or sibling pairs, um, you tend to be able to kind of prune that tree, right? We have an
mm,
origin story, and then we have little branches that come out from that act like antennae, and they're like, sensing whether something threatening similar to this is going to come around, right? And so we don't ever want to have this painful event again, so we cut things off at the top so that we don't have to have that. As soon
mhm,
as you deal with the origin story, in my experience, these things tend to prune. So they're
mhm,
still kind of there, but they don't feel as sensitive or as like on high alert.
mhm,
And that gives the relationship a bit of new ground to grow. It's
mhm.
a little bit more fertile to kind of grow a healthier
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah. And it seems really important to say that it's okay to have a reason to step away from a relationship. There
Definitely.
are lots of reasons, especially when you mention abuse or neglect or just any sort of harm that has been caused in that relationship. And if it's directed towards a person, sure, step away. But doing that internal work and getting into therapy and starting to understand and process what actually happened so that you're not, it's almost like coming back to an earlier topic, you're not the victim in it. And I guess the caveat is we can be victimized by people, but to live in a
Hmm.
space of always being the victim in that story isn't fair to you. Like, we need to be able to say, I'm choosing to not be in this relationship, and this is why, and I'm going to move forward with my life. If I choose to re-engage that relationship, I will do so in a different way. I also don't have to, but just to be in a place of, I hate this, I don't want to do it anymore, it doesn't feel good, I'm cutting off, that usually doesn't evolve our growth. And it does feel a little bit tricky sometimes, because we can be very hurt by people and we can in fact be abused by people. And so we do not need that in our lives and we should leave.
Yeah,
But there is still work to be done for ourselves to process that and to make whatever choices we want to
absolutely.
moving forward.
Absolutely. I often suggest an intervention to people who have been betrayed or
Mhm,
abused or neglected, um, that at the end of their day that they have a statement, that they
mm,
a self statement of forgiveness, forgiving
mm,
yourself, and forgiving others, with the caveat that you can hate anyone again in the morning if you want to.
mhm,
Okay? You can hate them all over again, and live with that during the day. But to start a habit of offering forgiveness for whatever you feel about this situation. I mean, I've heard so many beautiful ways that people word this, and you say
mhm,
the same statement because it opens up a part of you that's not wanting to be open, because
mhm.
we're in protective mode.
Right.
When you're a victim, the whole point is that you're like, never again, like,
Mhm,
I'm closing off. No one can hurt me. I won't take that from anyone ever again. Very empowering first move.
mhm.
And you can't, but we're not meant to live alone.
Yeah,
We're not meant to live
yeah.
without support and without love and without companionship and without friendship. We need those things. And
Mhm,
if we learn how in this, so this little act of letting go at night, gives you that a bit, that little muscle that you start to practice
Mm-hmm.
that allows you to start to imagine the possibility of being able to let other things, you know, go or ease back or, being
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more flexible. It's good
Mm-hmm.
for everyone to learn to do that a little bit.
Yeah. I love that you are mentioning this because when someone has deeply hurt us, we want to protect. We don't want to do that again. But that protection can then create a barrier between us and all kinds of other people because we're so afraid that that will happen again. So
Right.
practicing building that muscle bit by bit in tiny moments at night before you go to bed of allowing just some space for forgiveness and love feels very, very important. Because if we're walking around protecting ourselves all the time, we don't get to enjoy really our life because relationships are a part of our life.
Exactly, Anne Marie. And the other thing, just to say that you meant when you mentioned like, walking around like that is, you know, energy draws on, it's a little bit like it begets its own. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if
Mm-hmm.
you're in protective mode, there's a bit of you looking around for things that are threatening, which of
Mm-hmm.
course is a survival skill. And yes,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a little bit like that saying of like, there's not a saber-toothed tiger, on the freeway. So
Mm-hmm.
responding in such a way is, disproportionate. And so the point is like, yes, in the immediate aftermath of something like you finally a person finally makes a decision to walk away from something toxic or abusive or negative,
Mm-hmm.
that initial act is massive. And then the point that you want to try to get to is the reason you walked away
Mm-hmm.
ostensibly is so that you have peace in your life. Well, you got to
Yeah.
build that. It's
Mm-hmm.
got to be built. It doesn't just naturally emerge because you walked away. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
that the idea of trying to find, the energy that you want to have in your world, that you want to
Mm-hmm.
survive with and
Mm-hmm.
thrive on, has to be something you invest in,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. This, I think, will be my last question
Okay.
with Dr. Bluma Sapir, expert in relationships. What have you learned? What is the most important learning that you have gained since specializing and becoming an expert in relationships?
Mm. The most important thing that I think that I've learned is that although we seek a binary explanation for things in our lives, they are unfortunately not reality. A person can be good and bad at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Someone might say there are no bad people. I think there might be, but they
Mm-hmm.
probably have good in them too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that we get stuck when we are hurt or we're saying a lot about being hurt, but like we could also say like, you know, when we get excited, I've seen people get so excited and then everything seems possible, but you also have to like,
Mm-hmm.
balance is everything is my point. You have to find a balance and strike a balance in your life, which, is essentially saying like there is one side and there is another side, but there is living in a continuum is really the way that I
Mm-hmm.
see the world. We are a continuum. Each and every one of us
Mm-hmm.
has a bit of all of the above inside, which is
Mm-hmm.
why I think that we're so fascinated by watching reality shows and watching animal, like those like natural history stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that we're fascinated by things because we relate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because we are complex, because we are not binary. We are multifaceted. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I think I've learned the most by seeing so many different people share their stories.
Mm-hmm. That makes so much sense. I love that you just named that. Um,
Thank you.
what do you want people to know about you? Where can they find you?
I, um, what would I like people to know about me? That I think that human beings are wonderful. I think that it truly, as trite or cliche as that might sound, I think that, so often when someone meets me, they'll in a at a party or at an event and they find out that I'm a psychologist, I mean, I would say 90% of the time they'll say, "Oh, I better not talk around you. I better not
Mhm.
say anything,"
Mhm.
and I really, it's quite the opposite. I'm like the safest person
Mhm.
that anyone could talk to, because
Mhm.
I have so much understanding and compassion for what it means to be a human.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the main things that I would want people to, think about me from now on when they find out that I'm a psychologist.
Yeah.
Um, and and where can they find me? So social media right now would be the best place. You know, um, Dr. Bluma Sapir on Instagram and Facebook. And my website, thepairinstitute.com, is in progress.
Mhm.
And so that will be available. I'll let you know when that's live. And
Yeah.
I have other things in the works too. So I'll let you know.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your wisdom on pairs, on these duos of people, because we are all in relationship, and just talking more about relationship and how non-binary the experience is of people is, I think, really healing to talk about and to hear from you about. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne Marie, for having me. It was just a pleasure to talk to you. Really, thank you.